Hey everybody, welcome to episode 32 of Tactical Crouch. We're coming at you with a bonus one this week. We just saw you on Tuesday, but we've got a pretty incredible guest. Of course, I'm joined by Joe and Yiska. Good to see you guys again. It's nice seeing you guys twice a week. It's
Nice. Sweet.
It's not bad. But seeing once in my life, I guess at this point, former coach for the Florida Mayhem, Misfits, big brains this week. We've got Mineral. Hey, welcome to the show. An OG.
Hey guys, how's it going?
From player to coach to Overwatch League. Man, what a journey. Epic. They're going to make a movie about it someday. I'm calling it now.
Who's going to play me? Aaron Paul?
No, I was saying this before the show. You're better looking than Aaron Paul. You're like you're a Chris Hemsworth kind of guy, I would say.
Actually, honestly, I got Aaron Paul a lot during the Breaking Bad frenzy when I lived in the UK, almost on a daily basis. So
that's that. Now that you mention it, yeah, that
I can see it.
You sort of look like him, yeah.
Yeah, that I could see it. Fair enough. Well, welcome to the show. Thanks for being on. We're excited. We've got so many questions for you, so I hope that you're prepared. So did you have a wrist brace on?
Yeah.
Is that
Too
just
much gaming.
Too
much gaming.
Yeah.
So I saw you came prepared for the show today. So that's awesome. And yeah, well, I mean, let's go ahead and get it started. But before we do, a couple of things. Make sure to follow the show on Twitter at tactical_crouch. And you can find the show on podcast feeds and everywhere. Just search for Tactical Crouch. And of course, we're on YouTube at youtube.com/KickedTripod. We also record live at twitch.tv/KickedTripod. Follow there so you know when we go live, because we will be doing like bonus episodes like this as we find guests who can come on the show. So make sure to do that. Other than that, let's get into it. Joe, we got news breaking. Beep, 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 beep.
Yeah.
So
at least it's not during the show today.
Yeah, it's not
before,
during the
thankfully.
show today, but it like a couple hours before the show, the Overwatch League gods are like, you know what? We've been breaking news during Tactical Crouch for the past 4 weeks, and they can't give you any hot takes on it. Now we can, because they broke it 3 hours before the show started. What happened?
So the Florida Mayhem, in partnership with their Contenders Academy team, decided that they were going to trade Shax, Fact Fiction, and McGravy being on their inactive stable for the main roster, to the Los Angeles Valiant in trade for Fate, their main tank, who has drawn many applause from his time in Apex and his overall prowess at the role. But Valiant's not been the hottest team in the world as of late. But I will say they have improved. I think it's kind of sad to see things get changed up, even though I know that it needed to, because they were really starting to get their stuff together. What do you guys what's the thoughts here? I'm generally pretty positive on this. I'll round myself out last, but general thoughts on the 3-1 trade.
Mineral, I'd love to hear your thoughts first, before Yiska
I think
explodes. Yeah.
No, I'm team.
All right.
I mean, I've always been a big fan of Fate, and obviously things weren't great at Valiant, which is, I think, the only way a player of that kind of caliber becomes available. And I think, Mayhem were lucky to have the assets to be able to pull that type of a trade off. I think in general, obviously Fate has caught a little bit of flag because of Valiant's performance, but I do think if he's happy, then he's definitely one of the 5 best main tanks in the league, or he can reach that potential. So I think it's obviously a terrific pickup for the Mayhem. And I think anytime you trade a player of that caliber, you're most likely losing the trade. But I think the return, if Fate was going anyway, then I think the trade, like the stuff, the package, I guess, that Valiant get in return is pretty decent. Obviously, McGravy's presumably going to back up space. And then I think Shax actually has even though he's a hit scan specialist, he has a very versatile hero pool. So I do see him potentially being the starter on Valiant. And then obviously Fact Fiction is the replacement for Fate. So they potentially get 2 starters. So I suppose it's a trade that kind of makes sense. And I think it's a huge pickup for the man.
I think the timing of the trade is nice as well. Like, we're coming into this break, they get to adjust to the new team atmosphere. I think speaking from the outside, I don't know if you want to talk about this, but just adding new people to the team can kind of boost morale in a way. You kind of get a re-up on the honeymoon phase. Is that something you think might play into maybe Valiant going into stage 3? Obviously with meta changes kind of aside, but just morale wise, do you think that might kind of bolster them a little bit more?
Yeah, I think they can definitely be a factor. I think going back to what you said in terms of this being a good time, I think actually this is sort of the only time you can make these big picture trades, because you have more time to prepare for the next stage. I think there's just too little time between stage 1 and stage 2, which is why, teams are always talking behind the scenes, but there's really not that much movement, between stage 1 and stage 2. And now it kind of makes sense to make these moves and sort of maybe hit the reset button on the culture or whatever, and kind of incorporate all of these guys because you have more time. So the timing does make sense. And yeah, I agree. I mean, if you're the Valiant, obviously you have a massive change. You have a change in coaching staff. You have potentially two new starters, 3 new players. Maybe you're not done making moves. I'm not sure, but yeah, I think it's always good when the going's tough and you kind of change pieces around. There's always at least a little more hope that you can kind of, turn the boat, I suppose.
Can I read between the lines here on something? Because this is, this is small, smooth brain me coming in here right now. But, Mineral for me too, as well, especially in season 1, was like, this guy is a top 5 tank. He's an amazing tank. And there's no doubt that he's that caliber of tank. But you said something about like being happy. And I mean, going from the Valiant to the Mayhem is not necessarily, at least if happiness comes with wins, is not necessarily the trade I'm looking for. Do any of you guys think that there's some big sign? I mean, we know that there's signings coming to the Mayhem, but he has to know who the Mayhem are signing and has to go, you know what? That's something that I'm coming on. I'm willing to come on for, right? Is that reading too much into it? But I don't see a player like Fate just going, yeah, Valiant, I'm sick of losing. I'm going to the Mayhem. Like, that's not, I don't think that's the most logical way.
You have to remember that he doesn't really have a choice either,
Yeah.
So
it just kind of ships you wherever.
That's fair.
Yeah.
I
mean, his market value certainly went down after the recent season, then sort of like semi out in the open. There were like maybe attitude, or rather let's say adaptability issues. We know Fate probably would do better in a purely Korean roster, and that's what he's getting, right? That's most certainly, like, the other players that are likely to come in, of course also are Koreans, and there's some outlook there. The question really for me is was there no one else that could have wanted Fate? Because sometimes, and that is sort of like a coach/GM thing, where it's like, well, that's fine if people have like attitude, behavioral, or like issues just to fit into a specific system, but that doesn't mean they are necessarily tainted for another system. But then the next coach says, oh, okay, I can make it work. It's interesting that it would then be the Mayhem in that sense, right? So still at the same time, it's now a question also of like reframing what success means for someone like Fate this season. If they make a stage playoff, I think that would be one thing that certainly qualifies as success at this point.
Definitely.
Now, in general, from the Valiant side, I think the trade overall is probably fair and balanced in terms of the value that everyone's getting. The only problem I have with that thing is Valiant to me looked like one of the most improved teams. Like, their trajectory was certainly pointing upwards. And while I'm not sure I would have expected, for instance, to be the trajectory to lead to a point where, for instance, they could still be playing for play-ins. Because at this point, I think they would need like a 70% win chance. That's a 5-2 stage twice in a row. I'm not sure if they would have gotten there. Therefore, I like radical changes, but I'm not sure if those changes are what is needed to get there. And of course, we don't know if they're done at this point. I also think it's a pretty big downgrade on the tank front. I'm not sure if Cookie is actually going to start again. I would rather think against it. I think both of these teams seem to be showing that they want to go either purely Western or purely Korean at this point. So we're looking at Fact, and certainly with Mayhem, the Academy, very good in terms of how that fared out, right? Very impressive season in that regard. A little bit unfortunate in the playoffs. I'm not sure, like, how if you want to rely on that as a Overwatch League main tank with like potential, or it's, in my mind, you now filled up the second slot, and it's nothing that sweeps me off my feet.
No, yeah, it definitely doesn't. It's not a big move. It's big in terms of like width, but in terms of like peak potential, yeah, I think this is a nice baseline foundational signing that kind of leads you on a course for Valiant within the next few years. It's like a franchise move in a way. You know what they're going to be playing for in terms of pieces come postseason, as we go into season 3, as we go into travel, if the players kind of tag along for that season, now you have a decent bench to say, okay, on a travel day, if somebody's sick, if somebody can't make it, if their visa's delayed, now we have a strong foundation to work with. And I think that was something that was a little bit lacking towards the end of season 1 for Valiant. That's when, a lot of the stirring started to happen within the roster. Obviously, earlier on, you had like Cuddles leaving, Kariv being bopped around here, there, all over the place, but we're starting to see teams really figure out where they want to be. Do they want to have a mixed roster? Do they not want a mixed roster? Where's our coaching staff? What kind of style do we want to play? We're starting to kind of figure that out. Some teams a little bit slower than others, but for the most part, I think this is a nice trade for Valiant. Mayhem not looking bad, I have to say. I'm liking what I'm seeing so far. I'm excited for them for stage 3. I've been very vocal about what the heck, bad teams, like, get it together. I feels like Mayhem's at least trying, and I can respect that.
I think real quick, because before we move on from that discussion, I think one thing that's flying under the radar a little bit is, for me, Shax. So whenever I talk to like European contenders coaches, it's almost only that name that comes up when I ask, okay, who should move up to Overwatch League? Very many players also just told me Shax has been the best player in contenders for a while now, at least in that region, right? So I think just in terms of versatility, in terms of understanding of the game, apparently also quite coachable. I think that is a great pickup that could certainly show value, depending on where the meta goes this season, or even if not, even if nothing changes. I think that's certainly a very good pickup that shouldn't be underestimated.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree, because I was a part of the recruiting process of Shax to Mayhem Academy, and I had the pleasure of coaching him last summer as well when I was helping our academy team. And I can really attest to that. I think when he came in, he was a little bit raw. Like, his fundamentals weren't great, but his mechanical skill was insane. And now he's had a couple of seasons growing on with Mayhem Academy, and I think he's got so much potential. Mechanically, he's really, really good. One of the better. He has potential to be one of the best DPS players, at least Western DPS players, I think. Mm-hmm. So I think he's definitely the best piece, I think, that Valiant are getting, both, especially since he's still young. So there's a lot of growth potential there still, I think.
Do any of you guys think the Valiant are done, like making signings right now?
No, I think I wouldn't be surprised if they had more trades. I wouldn't be surprised if they signed another coach.
That is happening, yes.
Yeah, I think that's bound to happen. I'll be interested to see what they do with Izayaki. I think Kariv's been integrated with that team long enough that they don't want to see him go. I think he's been like a really big role player for them. So I don't think they'll be letting him go anytime soon. But Izayaki, definitely, if they are trending towards a Western core and we want to, try to facilitate Western talent coming up, I don't know. I know that they just posted a video. I haven't had a chance to watch it yet, just to see exactly what kind of, system they're proposing, or at least through, public channels. So we'll see. I'll be interested to see what happens with Izayaki. If he finds himself on a Boston, or, just moving him around elsewhere. I'll be interested to see.
What I will say this, I think the entire trade from the Valiant standpoint, and I told you this already, Joe, I would like this trade a lot more if Valiant had a contenders team. Just to put maybe some of those players on two-way, see how it works out, like have a couple of options, what to do with the roster. I mean, Valiant must know from last season that it's not amazing to have a gigantic roster when rotation can't necessarily happen, and that two roster thing, still no precedent that actually works. So yeah, I worry a little about that, just like from a team culture perspective. Then again, I also think that the pieces they have in terms of like coaching staff and team culture is probably strong. I think from the outside, of course, I can't evaluate that, but Packing certainly seems to have arrived as a head coach as well. So since he's taken over, there's certainly an improvement in performance and also score, if like something numerical.
Yeah, definitely.
So yeah, I think they're on the right track, certainly.
I think, to your point, this also shows the power of having a contenders team, where you can make these trades from contenders to Overwatch League and really offset the costs, or even equalize the cost of making player trades. And I think that's the future. I think it's when you want to pursue somebody's contract, okay, who do you have on your bench that we might want to develop in the future? I think that's really powerful.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I mean, there's no way Mayhem has a chance to land a player of this caliber if they don't have an academy team that performs well. So
yes,
even though like having an academy team today might not have, like, you're bleeding money with salary, with all the expenses, these are the moments you try to keep an academy team for, so you can convert these pieces into something bigger. It's something that, like, you look at Boston, obviously there were rumors about them potentially flipping Fusions for Fate, right? Like during stage one, they just got a guy up from contenders in Fusions, and almost within a couple of weeks flipped him for potentially a top 5 tank, and it's just, there is a ton of value in terms of bringing these guys up. If you have a good coaching staff and you can make these guys look good on stage, and then, maybe there's some trouble going on in another team and they want to move a piece, then you can be in the conversation. Because something Yiska mentions is like, was this the best they could get? Was there anything else potentially? And if you think about it, if they do want to go down a full Western path, then, who else is there? Like, what Western tanks do we have? There's Muma in Houston, there's Fusions in Boston, right? Like, who else is there really?
Yeah, you could look to European contenders. So once again, then you have the problem with visas, and that might well take way longer than these 4 weeks that we have now. So that's always going to be a consideration, where you probably want to hire someone that either already plays in an academy team where the visa process has been at least initiated. And I'm actually not sure, were all these players in the US from...
Yeah, everyone in Mayhem Academy was in the US this season, and everyone has a visa.
Yeah, so that already is like a lot of value, just in terms of what that means for a transfer market. Honestly, it's really prohibitive to contenders players at this point if you're not already engaged in that process. Yeah.
Cool. All right, I think it's time for the gauntlet. I think we've said enough about this one. Mineral. We've got some questions that we want to send your way. Thanks, Joe, for putting all the time into the notes, by the way. I really appreciate it.
Yeah,
really good questions, too. I'm going to take the first one because it's probably the only one I can ask. And so it was a really interesting one that Joe put out, and it was I'll just ask it straight away. What's the biggest problem the public doesn't know about or doesn't talk about with regards to coaching in the Overwatch League?
That's an interesting one. I guess we can piggyback a little bit off of what we were talking about in terms of culture clashes. I think that's a big one that is addressed, but maybe not. I guess people don't really understand how much of an issue it can be, and that's why you see a lot of these teams going either full Korean or full Western. There are obviously teams which have a healthy mix of both Korean and Western players, but it takes a very strong team culture. I think it takes very open-minded players, both on the Western and the Korean side, to be able to pull that off. Because I think the culture is really different. I've now been part of teams where you have a minority of Koreans and a majority of Koreans, but never going full way one or the other. And I can tell you that it is very tough. Like, the culture is very different. They see things differently. They want to practice in a different way. So I think that's a big one that I think causes a lot of issues probably across the league. So, but which is why sometimes I guess teams choose to make these drastic moves and players become available as a result. So I think that's maybe one. Another thing is probably, how much work it is something that people maybe don't think about. Obviously, it's talked about that it's definitely a grind, but I think even the teams that are the best staffed in the entire league, who have like full coaching staffs and everything, I still think they're understaffed. And anyone who's below that threshold, I feel sorry for those guys, because you just get overwhelmed really, really easily. So I think especially heading into next year, when you're going to travel back and forth, I think it's going to be, the guys are going to burn out. So I think it's definitely going to be important for everyone to staff up, because the load is massive.
Can I just don't watch VODs, by the way? No, just kidding. Sorry. Yeah, go ahead, Yiska.
So one thing that is interesting that has been brought up to be by some of the staff from Season 1 teams is that they actually feel the pressure is higher and the risk of burnout is higher now this season. Sort of against what one would think, because less games, should lead to less stress. They argue less games leads to more stress and harder practice, because one game means more. And just like flanking out at a specific time, especially if you're a team that, I mean, depending on your division, sometimes you just have this pressure of having to win here in order to still have a prospect. So do you think that's something that you noticed? Where was the pressure generally higher, in Season 1 or Season 2, based on the system?
So I might not be the right person to ask this. I think it's difficult for me to answer it, because in Season 1, I worked alone for a good chunk of the season.
Yeah. Okay.
So for me, it was definitely Season 1. I had a little bit more help in Season 2, but yes, I think for me it was them. But I mean, I definitely understand what you're saying in terms of every game is more valuable now, and also back then you would play 2 games every week, so there would be a lot of situations where like, well, we have 3 days to prepare for 2 matches on a back-to-back. We're not going to prepare for both games. There's no chance. We're playing 7 maps, so let's just prepare for the one that's going to give us the highest chance to come out of this week in a positive manner. Whether that, like, if we're an elite team, we're going to prepare for the harder team. If we're a bad team, we're going to prepare for the team that we have a higher chance to win against. And then you neglect the other team a little bit. Whereas now, obviously, with your games, you have to prepare for every single game. You see how much every single game matters in terms of stage playoff implications, because map differential pretty much decides where you go every single stage. And that's a lot of money that you're competing for. So yeah, I think I can definitely see that angle in terms of there being more pressure this season. And obviously there's more interest as well. There's more pressure from the fans. If you start underperforming, like, the heat really comes at you, like you saw with us, with Mayhem, with Outlaws, with a lot of the other teams that are at the bottom. There's definitely a lot of pressure.
Sure. Yeah.
This kind of
that was a really good answer. I was like soaking it in. Sorry.
This kind of sparked up because I kind of through the grapevine, I had overheard some coaches talking and about some of these little nuance based problems that many people don't think of, like even when we're going into travel in 2020 with Season 3. With practice, it's like, okay, well, what are we going to do with practice when we travel? What's that about? Now it's that kind of opened me up to like, wow, a lot of the basic stuff gets called into question. What do I do to eat? Well, what is that the coach's job? How good is my manager then? Now you're actually going to get a good understanding of who's doing what in your team. Is it the coach's job? You know, how good is my manager? Is he or she, you know, moving around with the coach, coordinating with, you know, some sort of delivery service to get us where we need to go? Like, things are going to be weird. Like, is there anything on the horizon that you kind of, I mean, obviously being within, you know, the Overwatch League for so long, this probably had crossed your mind once or twice.
Yeah. And I mean, just looking ahead, I think it's a logistical nightmare because, like you said,
absolutely,
having good managers is going to be super important, you know. And I think season one, I think there were a lot of teams that were underprepared, that were maybe poorly run, and I think heading into season two, everyone's a lot smarter. There are a lot more people that understand the league and what it takes and how you should run a team. So I think that's sort of, you know, like everyone's learned how things work, but heading into season 3, everyone's gonna have to relearn everything, because you're flying around. How do we practice? How do we schedule? You know, how do we make sure that we're in time for practice? Like, you know, do we need an academy team to practice when we're at home? You know, say if we're at Paris and London and we're playing at home for 4 weeks, who do we practice against? Other contender teams, you know, or each other. But what if Paris is on a road trip and we have no AL teams to prepare against? Then we only have our, you know, either we play on bad ping or we practice against our academy team. So how much do we have to invest into our academy team to make sure that they're good enough to give us quality practice, so that then when these guys come in and we perform in front of our fans, we're not going to, you know, put up a sorry performance because we're underprepared. We haven't been pushed in practice, you know? So I think there's going to be a lot of things that are going to be tough. And I don't envy the general managers.
It's weird.
I think that things are already tough. Like, what I didn't know was, in terms of the homestand, the first one in Dallas. So of course, I didn't consider this at all. But of course, there's not enough practice facilities for everyone to practice. So what happened was, Blizzard mandated practice or scrim blocks and scheduled them. Now, in itself, so everyone gets a fair share of practice. The problem is, they were very rigid in the time frames where that had to happen.
And if you remember, what team was there? There's one team that everybody can't prepare for, and you feel real bad if Blizzard just says, "Hey, you get to scrim Chengdu today. You guys excited for that one? You get to scrim against the team that's going to give you absolutely net zero practice against most teams in the league. Congratulations, that's who you're scrimming today."
That. And also, let's not kid ourselves. Dallas probably has some practice facility in Dallas that allows their team to completely practice through all this entire thing. So it's certainly a huge advantage in that regard.
And again, this is no shade to Blizzard. Of course, this, you know, it's an unfortunate circumstance. It just so happens that you have one team that's completely different from the league. So it's no shade against Blizzard. It's just, you know, a funny situation.
That's a home court advantage, huh?
Yeah. Definitely. It's also like that was the thing that opened my eyes. Like, whoa, like now teams are gonna, like, I don't know, what do? Buy laptops for the players so they can scrim like at their apartments? Do you make like some sort of like like, okay, what happens if your internet goes out? Do you have like USB drives of like VODs to review instead? Like, like there's gotta be fail safes upon fail safes, because you're gonna be all over the world, apparently. I don't know, you know, what happens if your internet goes out? What happens if your hotel just doesn't have strong Wi-Fi to practice on? You got to do something.
Yeah.
This is the most opinionated on a subject you've ever been in 32 episodes, Joe. I just need to say this, right?
It was pretty good last time.
It's about hotel internet. If you ask Joe how he feels about hotel internet in the Overwatch League, he's going to give you something.
It's also, if you've ever been to an esports event, especially if you stayed in a player hotel, you know hotel Wi-Fi is completely wrecked. Everyone's on their
everybody's
phones,
on the bandwidth watching
something, and it turns into an absolute slugfest. So there's no way that when people are put into one location, that this is going to net any practice environment whatsoever. So,
well, I believe it's already been said that all of the places need to have practice facilities for both teams.
Yes, for both teams, yeah. Which once again would that sort of suggests to me, in my mind, I was like, okay, logistically, we probably have circuits moving around from arena to arena. But then someone says, okay, 14 home games. Okay. Also, like, only 2 teams need
probably
practice
not gonna
facilities.
happen, by the way.
Yeah.
I mean, 14 home games, but probably 7 or 4 or 5 actual home events. You know,
Yeah.
like realistically, like maybe people know something that I don't here. There's people aren't traveling game by game.
No, again, I think that's the end goal, like way down the line. But for season 3, I think logistically, I don't know, in a
global league, if you can logistically make that happen. Like, I don't know. Like, imagine 30 teams, 6 in Europe. Like, I've scheduled tournaments before in like baseball tournaments in Minnesota. No, that's not. That was tough. So I don't imagine how you do it worldwide.
How do you even broadcast it? Like, if it's only 2 teams in one location playing against each other and that's it, then how do you move on to the next game? Like, are we going to broadcast from a studio in North America? Like, how, like all of that stuff, I have no idea how they'll figure it out.
So hard.
No.
Production needs to be at the scene anyway at all times. Remote production, does that even work? Do you need to set up, like, maybe you have like complete kits that every arena has to have, that then is very modularized, so to speak, so producers can log into that. Even then you probably need people at the location. That is going to be challenging.
No, I think the plan is to have actual like broadcast teams at the location, if I understand correctly. But
I mean, casters certainly should be at the location, right? Like, they have to be there. You have to hear the crowd and all that. So, like, I think they have to. But maybe they'll put like certain caster duos in a location. So all the home games in Asia, UberX and UberX are casting, and then Monty and Doa maybe take the NA. I don't know. Like, maybe that's how they're going to do it. Because making casters fly all around the world is like, they're going to burn out as well. It's rough.
I think they want to go the traditional sports route, where each team, each franchise has 2 or whatever voices of the franchise that ended up casting those thing. And I think like some who can afford it have, UberX.
It's just such a
and then some have KickedTripod and Volamel.
But by the way, I think that's very likely to happen based on some information I have. That it's just going to be a little bit compartmentalized who casts which games from which team. And that is certainly going to happen. Now, one thing you hinted at is very interesting to me, is like the home advantage, what that means, right? So I remember reading this 538 article about home advantages in regular sports. And as it turns out, they corrected for all the other factors. And it seemed to be the case that the biggest influence, or much of the home advantage, was actually in influencing the referee's decisions. Now, of course, this doesn't happen in esports as much or at all, depending on the game. But it's still interesting to me what that then means to have home advantage, possibly. Because certainly there's the psychological effect of playing in front of a home crowd. Doesn't necessarily have to be only positive for all players. Certainly some players crumbling under the pressure. But also, just the idea that maybe you get to get better practice at home because of the facilities known to you, and you don't have to travel. That's probably a big thing. We haven't even thought about like jet lag when people have to travel, depending on where they have to travel. Like, I'm not sure what home advantage will mean in Overwatch, but depending on what kind of system we play under next year, it might be just as big as it is in sports.
Yeah, I think maybe even bigger, because, it's like all of the things you said, the jet lag factor, that's not really that big of a factor in, say, the NBA, where, you're traveling through time zones, but it's not that bad. Guys
4 hours
in
max.
NBA, yeah, they also play 82 games, so everyone is sort of used to crowds. Like, crowds obviously influence you, but not too much. Whereas, we only have 28 games this season. There's probably going to be a lot of rookies coming into the next season. You're going to play in front of big crowds, and that's going to influence you a lot. You're not sleeping in your own bed. You're sleeping in a hotel with iffy Wi-Fi, whereas the other team has a neat practice facility, has all the practice partners. I think like all of these things will add up a ton. And I'm very curious to see how it's going to look like statistically, but I think it's going to be a very big deal.
Joe, I'm not going to let you get started on the Wi-Fi part, but there's also the fact that traditional sports, if you're playing basketball or baseball and you are competent enough to play that professionally someday, you're traveling at the age of 10.
Mm-hmm.
You're playing in other cities at the age of 10. You're doing all these different things where it's not like okay, cool, I turn 18, time to travel the world. Like it's very much flip on the light switch as well. So
Yeah.
it'd be really interesting to see how people kind of
Which
adapt
is
to that.
another kind of parallel to kind of traditional sports and how it relates to esports, because we don't have like foundational development at a very young age for esports yet, right? We're starting to see collegiate stuff come in, and you know, God bless all the people going out there doing high school stuff, because I can't imagine that being very fun. But you don't have those kind of, you know, coaches that you develop with, especially in the States. We have like, you know, traditional coaches that you can go to and you respect, and you learn how to be coached, and you figure out, is this for me? I don't know. But a lot of these kids are still just, I played this game for a long time, I'm real good at it, now I'm getting paid for it, and I'm supposed to go and learn how to deal with travel anxiety and deal with, you know, public like doing PR stuff. Like, just doesn't make sense to a lot of these kids. And I think travel is going to influence that like tenfold and become its own issue, that like you're going to see a lot of people flake out, and it's not to their detriment. It's nothing against them. This is just hard. It's hard to do this, let alone practice and learn and understand the meta and, you know, figure out when I'm supposed to be doing this, that, the other thing. Oh, and then I have to catch this flight and it's delayed, and oh, my manager's complaining and we got to do, like, that's a lot of pressure that like just normal people don't have. I go to my 9 to 5, I come home, and then I do whatever I want, right? Most like kids in esports don't have that kind of training by osmosis by going through a system.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Here's another one.
Surprises me.
Here's another one. All right, yeah.
Here's another strange thing. What about broadcast times? Like, what time do you broadcast the European Games?
Mm-hmm.
Whatever time works the best for NA. We already know this answer, Yiska. Like,
Yes.
of all the stupid questions that get asked on this show, that's the worst. It's just optimized for NA. We already know this. Yeah.
I know. My brain's currently fried for
Nate
waking up in the
Nanzer
middle
wakes
of the
up
night to
at
watch those playoffs
3:30
games.
a.m.
So funny.
Spends 2.5 hours in the gym and grooming his beard, and then does his day, and then, you know, he needs to be at bed at a decent time. So that's why we optimized for NA Pacific time. This is just not.
It was hilarious. We were sat in Yiska's Discord last night and we're watching the games, or maybe not even really watching the games, just kind of like observing the games. And he pops in like at, what was it for you, like 5 a.m.?
5 a.m.
Yeah, he pops in, watches the games. He's like, nah, I'm going back to bed.
No.
Again,
what actually happened was I woke up. I'm on the verge of drinking my coffee, and like London loses this, so it's 2-1, and they are completely getting stumped. I'm like, maybe I should hold off on this coffee, and I just put the coffee down. 1 hour 6 minutes later, that match was over, and I was like, oh, I can go back to bed, and I don't have to stay up the entire time. Like,
such a pain, because we were talking about this earlier. Like, I remember getting up for like early StarCraft 2 matches in Korea, and even Apex in Korea, like watching a game at 5 a.m. and then immediately trying to catch some more sleep so I can actually be a productive human being like at a decent hour is not conducive of like retaining information. It's like impossible. So yeah, like normalizing the schedule, maybe even bringing in more European teams. I know that they said they weren't super interested in it for season 3, but I think it's mandatory at least in the future.
I think homestands get optimized for, assuming that we have a homestand-esque thing next season. Mm-hmm. It gets optimized for the local audience, right? They're not going to fill a stadium of 3,000 people at 3 a.m. just because Nate Nanzer wants to watch at 3 in the afternoon in California. Okay, that's not going to happen. But eventually, I do think that I think they keep it normalized. If we see true home and away games like consistently, and not these little home stands.
Mm-hmm.
I think it must be a totally scattered broadcast then, right? Because there's certainly issues with like arenas closing or not allowing certain ages to still be outside in Europe. So this is going to be a huge challenge. I cannot even come up with a solution for this, right? That it's like
midday matches. I don't know.
It's so like it's at 3 a.m. these playoff matches start. Like there's no way you can sort of make this work with Europeans. Like the difference is 9 hours to the West Coast. There's like the broadcast won't take that long. I can even see that some games will be starting at the same time. I don't think we will have like a show, if you want. That goes
I
from
agree.
start to
I think
finish.
that eventually, like if you have 30 teams or whatever, like let's say the ultimate goal is around 30, I think is what Nanzer said at one point.
Like
yeah, something like that. You have 30 teams playing every week internationally. There's no way that you don't run into overlap. There's obviously the one side of things where, you know, in the NFL, you have, you know, 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 6 o'clock games or whatever, and then Monday Night Football, and now Thursday night. And is there a Tuesday night again too or whatever? Because, you know, there's more of that, but there are 2 or 3 games going at noon. There's 2 or 3 games going at 3. And you just hope that you're in a region in the United States where one of your teams is playing at the time that gets broadcast and whatever. So there's probably an aspect where like we're streaming on the internet, luckily, so we don't really have to deal with, it's not like I have to subscribe to MLG.TV yet. Maybe you're right.
You know, UFC
you
just did that with ESPN.
You get
got to
the
watch
Twitch
all their pay-per-views
feed
on
of whatever they tell
whatever.
you to watch, and then if you subscribe at MLG, then you get, you know, the whole 50-yard line. What is it called? I don't know what the NHL center ice where you can watch any of them, and I hope they black out games too. I'm just kidding.
MLG had this 10 years
They tried
ago,
to do years ago where they tried to go, hey, we're gonna gate your time watching our events, which at the time they were like weekend events for multiple games, and they were really early on trying to figure out monetization for esports and trying to get people to pay for it, and don't think it worked too well for
the road pavers that didn't make it very far.
Here's a short little anecdote, because at this time they bought Godfrag and they wanted to have coverage, right? And they were like, oh yeah, we have WoW Arena, why don't you write for us? So I didn't know what that entailed. And we're like, yeah, okay. So just write like matches up and whatever, and we promote it on stream. And then I ended up like, I think I got like 8 hours of sleep over the course of 3 days. And I bought this pass. I think it was 280p live streams, and then it upped it to 720 or something. So I could do my job. So I paid $10, and the editor-in-chief was like, yeah, I'll get you a little something. Never got me anything. I was actually 10 euros down from working 60 hours that weekend.
Welcome to the esports grind of paying to write. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I love it.
Godfrey, you still owe me.
All right, let's go back. Joe, where do you want to go next with this, man? Not so fast, man. Not so fast.
I think you brought up a pretty interesting point, Mineral, you know, going back to what kind of pressure is on coaches. Now, going back to season 1, like you mentioned, you were alone for most of that season. So I kind of wanted to get like what was your day like? And how little was that involved in sleeping? Because I can't imagine, you know, this was the era of like, oh, teams don't really know. Like, I shouldn't say teams. Ownership doesn't know what this entails yet. This is like, oh, like 1 or 2 coaches should be able to manage this. Yeah. No.
Well, yeah, so like, I also I also want to know what it's like to be able to train yourself to sleep and watch VODs at the same time. That's just all I wanted. Like, how do you do that? So besides that, sorry.
What was that like? What was like a day in the life of a season 1 coach kind of working by himself to try and make up teamwork?
Well, it was pretty rough. I'd say until we moved sort of a little closer to the arena, where because everyone pretty much season 1, pretty much everyone practiced at the arena on the LAN client, whereas now everyone practices from their own facilities on OPR. So everyone would drive down to the facility to practice. So until we moved closer, and until we got in some assistance, I was probably doing like anywhere from like 10 to 14 hours a day. And with like pretty much no days off for like maybe 2 months, because obviously on my days off, on the one day off we have, I have to prepare for 2 opponents that week.
Yeah.
So I have to do that's sort of when I have to go in and do the scouting and, making sure we're prepared, that we're strategically sound, that have something to present for, to start the week. So yeah, I mean, it was kind of a lot because I had to had to wear a lot of hats. I had to do the scouting. I had to do the feedback during the matches. I had to be the team psychologist in a way, in terms of getting the guys motivated and all that stuff. So, and like what I learned from, like, the biggest lesson I took away from that was that you have to learn to prioritize, even if like it's seemingly like an impossible situation. I don't look at it as, oh, I was just put in a shitty position and there's nothing I could have changed. I look back at it and I'm like, well, I was trying to do all of these things and I was working so many hours, but I was kind of diluting my workload, and I was doing an average job, let's say, in every category, and what I realized was that, because obviously when results are poor and maybe a certain player is underperforming and players start losing trust for each other, that should be my priority as a coach, because it doesn't really matter how good we are strategically, how strategically sound we are, or how prepared we are, if players don't trust each other, if they go into practice, with something weighing on them. So that's something I certainly realized that I should have been more on top of the guys. Like, don't prepare for every game, like prioritize, like I think that's what a head coach in Overwatch League has to do, even now, regardless of how much staff you have. You look at the 20 problems every team inevitably has, you isolate like the 2 or 3 most important ones, and then you solve them and you get ahead of them. And that's something I got a chance to do a little bit this year, but obviously looking back at last year, that's probably my biggest takeaway and what I learned the most. But yeah, obviously working alone is a bit rough. And you have to prioritize.
That is one of my biggest gripes with like players in Overwatch. It's like their underappreciation of coaches in general before the Overwatch League was already laughable at times. So it's like, well, he doesn't really do anything. It's like, okay, so
every time I hear that out of a player,
dude, literally the head coach has a responsibility towards setting the team's culture, right? The difference between and then it's always like, well, and then when the results are not happening, it's like, well, he doesn't really do anything. He just tells us when to. It's like, dude, the difference between a head coach being like the guy that imposes the culture and then has the analysts working around him is a championship win, or being Washington Justice, where the head coach is probably strategically very strong, doesn't have a proven track record of setting a team culture. So, like, that skill set certainly is very valuable, and also there's transitional skill from other esports where you can bring in these coaches. For instance, London did it, right? So certainly, just like in terms of setting the tone of how things are approached, but then also getting the brains in, but then having a leader that also can evaluate, like the most important skill in Overwatch, also the most underdeveloped skill in Overwatch, is the guy that evaluates the evaluator. So a GM that says, I don't really know enough about Overwatch, but I know this guy has something in his personality or in his skill set that radiates leadership, and whatever decisions he makes, he's a good people's person. Like, he understands what kind of tools he needs. He needs like a strats guy. He needs maybe like a numbers guy. And he also has the ability to judge their skill set without necessarily having it. That is like so underrated in Overwatch, just as like a skill for a GM. And a lot of them knows that. Of course, this is something that also can be learned or has to be learned. And we didn't have much time for these GMs. It is actually kind of sad because GMs legitimately need to be excellent in their job. They have a responsibility to be excellent at their job because they are the gatekeepers to greatness, right? They tell you, okay, we're signing this player, we're saying this coach, and they are facilitating everything. It basically all comes down. Okay, maybe it's not the GM in name, depending on what the franchise is, but there's this one person that has most of the responsibility and most of the leadership. And if this guy isn't virtually the most talented person in the organization, you're probably going to run into issues along the way.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Like the importance of having really solid management, someone in that position who's really good. And like to touch on something that you said as well, in terms of, like the head coach has to be someone who sets the culture. I can definitely, and you mentioning Washington, obviously I don't know what's really going on there, and I can't say this or that. But in terms of like that's a role you have to. It's like it's being a completely different skill set from the strategical standpoint. I 100% agree, because like heading into the league, I also was kind of, I was sort of a glorified strategic coach, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I was sound strategically. I could really contribute with that, but I wasn't, the type, like I wasn't, I didn't understand like how to really run a team from the point of view of like, how do we solve these issues? How do we address them? How do we not shy away from conflict? How do we, tackle all of these things, and we're proactive in solving these things? I think it's very difficult to learn that. I think you have to, first of all, understand that that's your job, and you have to take on the responsibility, which I did as the time went along, and I definitely understood it this year. But it's very difficult if you don't have that experience, because maybe you haven't been in a position where you have to deal with players' egos or players talking back. How do you do that? How do you set the culture where everyone accepts these things? You look at a team like Shock, where they come in and they have an undefeated stage. Like, to me, that's a sign of a really strong culture. Like no one's like, part of my friends, like no one's fucking around there. They're coming in and they're looking to wreck you every game. They're not taking maps off. They're hungry to get back and win the game. And like, that's the culture, I think, that's set by Presti and the coaching staff over there. And I think, like it's so important to have that. And like you say, I think it's important to both find the right person and a head coach who can carry that load and do that, but also have people above him who can steer him in the right direction, have that experience. And again, like a lot of GMs also were coming in sort of raw into season one. I didn't know what their jobs were. Well, do I contribute here? Do I contribute there? Like what is actually my role? So yeah, I think there's definitely a ton of value in both roles.
A lot of it sounds like is delegation and knowing where your weaknesses are. Like, am I the strongest strategically? No. Okay, let me hire somebody who is. Am I the best manager? No. Let me get somebody who is. Let me get the team leader. Let me get the glue guy in so that we can shore up those weaknesses. Is it the GM? I don't know. I don't know if it's the GM that needs to do that. I can't imagine what their day-to-day is either.
It's very variable depending on the organization, I would imagine.
It depends on the organization, and I also wonder who's making the business decisions behind the scenes. Is it are the GMs the ones going out and finding the arenas, trying to make those deals go, happening, whatever. There's a lot of franchise moves that either need to be delegated elsewhere, because it does feel like the league in general is just understaffed, and there hasn't been a good like churning of exactly who does what where. Right? Is the GM supposed to be booking the flights, or is that a team manager? Does every team have a team manager? Like you said, it is variable between all the teams, and that's got to kind of figure itself out. I don't know that the league is going to be mandating that by any time or ever.
I don't think they should either, though, right? No, like part of it though is there is somebody in the organization. I don't want to say GM, but probably the GM who's like delegating these tasks, right? PR, social media, coaching. Okay, head coach, you're taking care of this part. Come back to me. Like that feels like that's how it should run.
Definitely.
And obviously I think it varies. I
don't know. I really don't.
It definitely varies too. There are definitely teams who thrive on this close knit, really small organization. And I mean, you look at, I'm on the Liquipedia page for the Mayhem right now. And from CEO down to everybody else, they have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 people. 11 if you don't count their streamer. They have 11 people in the organization now. They've clearly like made some like additions there, but you can't just like translate that to wins, right?
No,
like that doesn't mean, and so I think $1 million question is, and man, you cannot answer this one if you don't want to. So, Mineral, you're back in a position as, a GM or a head coach or whatever. like what for you would have translated a team like the Florida Mayhem to a playoff caliber team?
How I would translate Florida Mayhem? Like
The
get them to
Florida
playoffs?
Mayhem-esque team. Like, how do you get a team
Okay.
like that? Because obviously that you were trying to do that the whole time. Like that's not, but like, you know, you've got a team, like what resources would maybe have changed that journey for you, I guess is what I would ask.
So in terms of stepping into another team, I don't really, it's just so difficult for me to say, because you have to step in and you have to figure out where are the issues. Do we have a talent issue? Do we have a staff issue? Is it a combination of both? Is it a culture issue? You know, do we have the right people to, you know, how do we want to build the team from the ground up? And I think obviously it starts with management and then goes downwards. You have to have strong people and have the right people making the decisions, and then you build the roster to kind of sort of try and emulate that culture. And but it's impossible for me to say like stepping into an environment of a bottom tier team and figuring out like where's the issue. It's all very situational, I think. In terms of Mayhem, I mean, I don't know. Like it's difficult to say, because you say obviously I tried to, you know, do better and get them higher, but we failed. I think we, you know, obviously season 1 was just like we were so underprepared from every possible aspect. And then, you know, season 2, I think we made good moves, but I think we didn't make enough of them. There were still a lot of things we could have done better to build up a better, like in all. Well, this is one thing in terms of like me talking about most teams being understaffed. I think one of the biggest things is that like no teams really have dedicated scouts, as far as I know, and I think that's so important to have someone like whose full-time job is to just watch all the sort of
contenders regions, even open division, like really going out there and finding your next generation of talent. I completely
exactly. Because if I'm the head coach and like my assistant coaches during the season, you don't have time to really watch all the contenders games. Then off season comes and you're like, well, now we have to start working on this. But it would be so much easier if someone already gave you a lot of information and you can sort of parse through that and then look at things, instead of that being your obligation. I think that's a big thing. Like I think you have to build out an infrastructure in a team where you think about all of these things, the stuff we talked about before. Academy, how do we build up a strong academy, even though it might be a bad expense now? How do we build that out and leverage that into maybe, you know, flipping players for better pieces in the future? Like all of these things, there's so many variables, and it's so hard to control all of these things that you have to sort of do it one step at a time. And I think in some aspects, I think Mayhem definitely improved. Others, I think we still could have done a much better job. I think one aspect where we improved is definitely the academy team. You know, like obviously now you can see the results of the guys developing. Obviously they got upset in the contenders bracket, but the players are still good. So it opens up the doors for a lot of moves. Whereas if you don't have an academy team, your hands are tied. You're waiting till next season pretty much. So because of like what Yiska said in terms of visas and stuff, it takes so long time. You have to sign the players, you have to negotiate, agree with everything, and then bring them over. You know, it's yeah. I mean, I kind of rambled on. I don't really know if I answered your question, but yeah.
Basically, you're saying it's
tough.
complicated.
There's a lot of
it's
things
not.
to
Yeah.
think.
So
it's complicated. Yeah.
I tried to kind of go somewhere tongue in cheek, maybe a little bit, but the fact is like we've all seen the comments and the people who, you know, are like, oh yeah, just like change this, just sign better players.
Get a psychologist
just
for him.
Get more people in your organization. Lol. Like just do this. Lol. Like it's not. It's so nuanced.
It's never that easy.
I don't want to say like it's unattainable, because it's not. Clearly teams have, you know, found certain things, and part of it for luck. Like there's at least 2 organizations who I've talked to who are just like, honestly, we got really lucky that these were the pieces that we put together, because we didn't actually account for that, but it ended up working. But there are also other teams where it's like, we thought that we had everything that we needed, and now we're like, well, so yeah, there's yeah.
Can I just, like, if I look at the current league standings, we've talked about like golden ratios before in this podcast, where Zen performance was very strong last season. Like in terms of, okay, the best Zens are also probably in the upper echelon, and the worst Zens. Then this season we talked about Divas. Dude, I'll straight up tell you, the golden ratio is investment. The bottom teams are the ones that invest the least, and the top teams are the ones that invest the most. And on a graph, like the only outliers really that I see are Boston Uprising, who once again get amazing bang for their buck and have already done so last season. But if I just like Vancouver, definitely not cheap. New York Excelsior, not cheap. San Francisco, buying Striker? Like, dude, of course they've budgeted. London Spitfire might still be the team with the highest buyouts ever paid in Overwatch League.
Yeah, and that was even before the league even started.
Gladiators comes in, Mr. 300K, right? Dallas Fuel definitely pays some of the best salaries.
And they have a deep coaching staff as well. Like, so
Absolutely.
They have a surprising number of coaches, and well, I should say support staff. It's not specifically coaches, but
yeah. Philadelphia Fusion. I don't think we need to talk much about that. That's certainly also the case. Guangzhou Spark. I don't know too much about them. Seoul pays well. And then you go down. Of course, we know about this justice situation through the grapevine. Houston Outlaws is in that predicament.
Well, now you're seeing the Justice getting an influx of money, as to your point. They get an influx of money, they have the signings, and suddenly they start to do better.
Yeah. So the only outliers that I see is like Boston Uprising, and I also think Charge is underperforming for what I hear they are investing. Other than that, it's pretty much just going through the table. While it won't be perfect in terms of what the expenses of each team are, there is a pretty high correlation, if we're being honest.
Yeah, I would agree.
I think that's a terrific point. It's something they thought about as well, because obviously Vancouver is number one. They haven't lost a game, but what did it cost? Probably several million just in buyouts, right? You want to drop that, then you're probably going to be on top at the top. Shock also pays a ton, right? So like you say, Boston is an interesting example, because I think if you made sort of a power ranking in terms of dollars spent per win, I think
they
Boston
would be
is at the top of
unreal.
that.
Not even close.
They're S tier, and then there's no A tier or B tier.
No.
Yeah.
They are the most value town team I've ever seen in my life. Trump StarCraft is all about Boston Uprising, dude.
Yeah, and I mean, and I think when you're building a team, you have to. There's two approaches. You either pay a large sum of cash for a core or for an entire team, or you try and pick bits and pieces. And if you're going the bits and pieces approach, you better have really good scouting and go through do your due diligence and put things together, and which Boston has done 2 years in a row now. So a lot of credit to them. And obviously with Mayhem, we also tried to go in a similar approach, but it didn't really pan out. But it's look at most of the expansion teams, most of them picked up cores from other teams, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So and then you add pieces here and there, and I think the challenge because it's something also to think about it, the challenge for a team that had a really poor season one showing, if you're hitting the reset button and you're cleaning the roster, and you're dealing with 8 other expansion teams that have a 1 month period where they can sign players and you can't,
yes,
it's very difficult for an existing team that didn't play their cards right in season one to rebuild and bounce right back up, because you're sort of an expansion team, but you're working up an uphill battle because the other expansion teams have an edge, and they probably have large budgets as well, because they're just starting up. They just bought into the league. They want to come in and perform well. And a lot of teams, a lot of teams did buy up cores, and so I think you either go one way or the other. And I think Boston is sort of the only team that has done really, really well in terms of scouting individual players and just snagging players, especially from different regions as well.
Yeah. They just got somebody from PAC Persia that looked okay. I don't know too terribly much about him, but I'm starting to realize that Boston has a system, and whoever they've got scouting has a good track record. So bringing him in, I have a much more a higher expectation than I would if any other team would have picked him up. So
we said this at the beginning of this season, right? We're just Boston did great in season one. I need to see just a touch more before I'm a believer. I gotta say,
I'm starting to become a believer.
Pretty much a believer at this point.
Yeah.
So sorry,
You
Boston
can
fans, because whatever team I start liking, they start doing really poorly. So
I mean, Shock's doing okay.
Yeah,
I think they're doing okay for themselves.
That's true, but once I stopped going to their viewing parties, they all of a sudden go
and then they
20,
drop a game.
They go 28-0, and then I go to a viewing party and they drop a game. So that's on me. My bad.
You're the
Shock
anti-Hurek.
Nation. I am. Oh man,
The good old boy.
yeah.
Yeah.
Joe, where else? I know you've got a few other questions, and they're really good ones.
One
Pick
that
your
kind
best
of
one.
popped up mid conversation is kind of evaluation of coaches and what you as a current former coach, but I would still probably still call you a coach. Just you have that experience, you have that mind, so I would call you a coach. What do you look at? Do you have anybody that you are friends with that you kind of bounce ideas off of? Like who would you say in the league currently? Obviously, like Krusty's a great example of like good coaching. You can see it through the play, you can see it through the discipline, the track records there. Who else would you say, in your opinion, is a standout coach that people are not taking enough credit or giving enough credit, I should say?
That's a very good question. It's very, very difficult to gauge because you don't really know what people are doing behind the scenes.
Of course.
So what you end up doing is you end up looking at the results and you're like, well, this is, these guys are performing well, therefore the coaches are good, or these teams are performing bad, therefore the coaches are bad. So I think it's very easy to fall into that trap. But obviously, Pavane has a pretty good track record with NYXL,
Definitely.
but he also has one of the strongest rosters. I think, I've heard good stuff about some of the guys in London, obviously. I think the team that probably deserves the most credit, I'm looking at the list of teams now, is Boston. Because obviously they've scouted talent well, but I think to be able to develop that many rookies, you have to have really good coaches. And I think obviously season 1 they had Krusty and Shake, and then Shake obviously took over the head coaching duties and I think did a good job. Like Boston
done well, yeah.
Exactly. Like Boston looked good even after Krusty left. And then this year they added Goomba, who I think was behind a lot of the success in Valiant. He left, and obviously not much else changed in Valiant, but a lot of their performances dropped off. And I think from what I've heard, from what I'm seeing, from like talking briefly to Goomba, I think he has a very good mind for the game, and he's very, very sound strategically. Obviously, I competed against him in the World Cup, and he is strategically super sound. So I think what they're doing in Boston is terrific. Even though they're 7-7, they're not very stable, but I think as coaches they're very, very solid.
Now, this kind of transitions well into, some of the results we saw, going into the stage playoffs. A team that I noticed that you were pretty big on was the old Hangzhou Spark. What would you say? Because we constantly hear that, oh, they're so clean behind the scenes and oh, they're so good. Even going in, stage 1, like this was the team that everybody was hyping up, and boy, did they underperform. Would you say that their coaching has been strong? Do you have any kind of inclination that might be the case? Like general thoughts about Hangzhou, but also like in relation to coaching and how their performance has increased, I would say.
So it's very difficult for me to gauge their coaching. Like I don't feel comfortable like saying they're good or they're bad. It's very difficult to say. I think going into the league, they looked very strong because they were relying on a lot of DPS compositions and these funky comps that no one really knew how to deal with. Okay. But then eventually 3 teams figured it out. They had to figure out all the rotations, and then Hangzhou was like, well, crap, we have to go 3-3 as well. And I think they were maybe lagging behind a little bit in terms of their understanding of 3-3, which is like they're definitely catching up now. And I think also obviously No Smite was playing and Gushia was on the bench, presumably because of the language barriers. I think that was the biggest issue, and now we see when Gushia is unlocked, he's absolutely insane when seemingly they've gotten over some of the comm issues. My read on Valiant and why I was high on them going into these playoffs was like even at the beginning of the stage when they were losing some games and they didn't feel that stable, I looked at their play and to me they looked so good with Winston 3-3. Like even I think it was against either Vancouver or Shock. Like I think they were playing against Vancouver on Gibraltar, and even though Vancouver won that game, I thought Hangzhou just kind of threw that match, but their Winston 3-3 fundamentals look much more solid than Vancouver's, even mostly because of how damn good Gushe is. Like his mechanics are insane. How fast he farms his ult. Right? Like you saw yesterday, he was lapping gesture and getting 2 ults for 1. Like he's absolutely insane. And I think their biggest issue was that on maps where they had to rely on Rhine at the beginning of stage 2, I could tell that they were struggling from a communication standpoint because they were really not in sync with their movement. They weren't reading the enemy movement. Their bubble usage was really, really bad. You could see so many times where Gushe was holding up shield, he would get a bubble and he would not be swinging, which means that there's not communication there in terms of, okay, let's take space with these bubbles. So you saw them just getting run over by more aggressive teams. And I felt like, well, that's like, if they can solve that, if that communication issue can get solved, then they can get more solid with Ryan 3-3. I think they can be super good. And then, we saw the game against Seoul, and I thought, well, they look much better than Seoul with the Ryan 3-3. Gushe was winning every trade. He was getting, 50% of his shatter on every bubble trade, whereas Marvel was getting like 15%, and he was just winning these early fights with shatter. So I thought, like, after seeing that game against Seoul, I just felt like their biggest weakness was kind of fixed, which is why I was high on them going to these plays. I still thought London would win this, but I thought it would be really, really close. And I'm not that surprised that they won. I think the reason was that dominant as well is because 2 of the maps were Winston 3-3 mirrors as well, and London just got smashed in that.
Even on Blizzard World, which I mean, I think we see a little bit of variance there, but for the most part, it's a Ryan 3-3 map, and it was a clinic. I felt like London just kind of got, I don't really know. Like I constantly, I started to review the match a little bit before the show, and I mean, Rhea just sneaking behind the front line and being able to juggle gesture like 2 fights in a row. Like, what about London? Okay, so let me reframe the question. What about London in that match kind of fell apart? Because I'm at a loss for trying to figure out what they did wrong. Was it a focus thing? Weren't they paying attention to Rhea? What do you think happened with London going into that loss? Because again, like you mentioned, like I assumed London probably would have put up a better fight and maybe could have edged them out, but this was convincing.
Yeah. So, I mean, like what I look at when I look at 3-3 mirrors is obviously you have to have good ult usage and all that stuff. But what I look at is, does this team know how to properly trade? Does every player understand how to properly trade with bubbles? And if you look back at that Blizzard World game, I think London had pretty much only had 1 gear. They would take every corner by bubbling first and just pushing as a 6-man unit. And Hangzhou had really good distance management. They would step away. They would space out so that gesture was only swinging on Gushe, and then they would retake space with their own bubbles. And if you look back just a couple of weeks ago against Vancouver, the same thing worked for Vancouver. They were initiating first with bubbles. Gushe was getting his bubble while standing still, but then Rhea was taking the swings. Godsby was taking the swings, and you just lose all the space. But I think what I saw on Blizzard World was that they were doing that aspect much better, and they were reading the distance. They were reading London's movement, and they kind of picked them apart from, in that regard. In which case you kind of fall back on, well, can we clutch individually, which is a lot more difficult to do in this meta. Fury tried his best. He ate a couple of grabs, but obviously just eating a grab isn't enough if you're losing every single trade pretty much.
Losing the neutral, as the kids say these days.
Exactly. You saw gesture overreaches. His bubble gets blown up, and he gets booped into 6 people, and it just disappears. And then London is trying to use ults to try and save him, and then you're just messing up your entire ult economy and just get snowballed like that. So that's why I saw in the Rhine matchup, I think Oasis was very close. It could have gone either way. I think I was happy to see how well Ding was playing on the Pharah and how well they executed with a 3 DPS, and then immediately switching and transitioning to the Sombra Goats for the retake when they only needed 1 fight. I think that's very smart. If you saw the game against Washington and Boston, I think that's certainly something Boston had the opportunity to do, and they would have probably come out with a win against Washington. But you could see Hangzhou doing that, and just winning the game off of smart swaps and executing with their DPS comps. So just strategically sound. I think their swaps were good. Obviously, I'm not a big fan of DPS compositions in this meta, but they got it to work and they swapped at the right times. And then their Winston 3-3 is just impeccable. Like Gusha just carries so many fights.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Another quick question. A lot of people have kind of postulated that one of the big reasons why NYXL style has kind of fallen off is this big Lucio change within regards to how quickly teams can engage rotations, if that makes sense, how quickly they can rotate. Do you think that that change has affected London negatively? Is that the reason why you think they might be a little bit lacking on their kind of macro play? The reason why they're trying to force these corners really hard is because they're kind of locked into this old fashioned like Lucio style where they can like speed through those corners, and maybe that's not just how you should be playing right now. Does that have any semblance of thought to it?
I think it's difficult to say, but I think they did look very like it felt like they played. The tendencies were pretty clear, and they were playing sort of in the same way. And again, like that's a style that worked for Vancouver just a couple of weeks ago. So maybe they scouted that and thought, well, Hangzhou doesn't respond well to pressure. This is how we should engage. This is how we should pressure them. But ultimately, I think the best 3-3 teams, Vancouver, Shock, all these teams, what they do very well is that they adapt on the fly. They notice a tendency and they can change their style. They're not like, well, this is the game plan. We're always going to use our bubbles this way. We're always going to use our ults this way, because this team plays this style. If you look at Shock and Vancouver, they always adapt. They always change it up. Sometimes they bubble first. Sometimes they bubble second. So if you get run over one fight, you go into your comments and you're like, well, they just ran over. They're bubbling first. Let's try and bait them. You go into the next fight. Well, now they're not bubbling first. Well, shit, they're not doing what we're doing. Now we have to change our plan. And it's because every single player, I think, in those teams has such a high understanding of the meta, and they can read enemy movement, and they understand what it means if the enemies bubble first. They can read the distance, and they understand what their job will be and what read their teammates will make, and they move as a unit. So I think that's the big thing. I think London just wasn't kind of versatile enough, I guess. I did think they ran through 3 look okay on Oasis. It was just on Blizzard World they kind of fell apart, which is like it happens, like you can get snowballed on that map pretty easily if you lose the first fight. And then Winston 3-3, it's just like you played completely differently. I was surprised that London opted into Winston 3-3 and Mirror on Hanamura. I think you can, like Hangzhou didn't even do that, and they have Gusha, right? They understand that it's probably easier to just take it with Reinhardt. And I think it's kind of difficult to take the Mirror as the attacking side on Hanamura, but they did it anyway, and they got really no value. So I think, yeah. And then we all know that from what we've seen is that London has a bit of a tendency maybe to mental boom when things aren't going their way. And I think heading into Gibraltar, it was kind of over. Like you saw in the way London played, like you can't take anything away from that map because everyone was an autopilot. Like you see the attack from Hangzhou, Fury is just standing, gets discorded, takes damage, and gets demeched.
Yeah.
On the other side of the map, and that's like that's
2 or
just
3 times actually. Yeah,
exactly. And everyone was making mistakes like that. It wasn't just Fury, So I think like Hangzhou captured momentum. London probably felt like, well, we have no answer, and then like they were just kind of gone mentally. I think that's at least what I saw.
I will also say it just felt like, I don't think ever since they switched Prophet onto Zarya, I don't think in a singular series he has had as many grabs eaten as he had in that series. Like honestly, that game actually put Rhea on my radar, and that's now the player I want to watch in like first person when I'm watching live. I think he had a great
early on in the
overall.
season. He was not the best, but I think that was just more to the Sparks, like Mineral said, like their communication, their coordination issues that have been apparent up until this point, where now you can see that they're a lot more coordinated. They have a structured game plan that they follow. Like Rhea, going all the way back to like XXU, is the person who filled in for Choi Obin, who we know is the Shock's flex tank, who is so immaculate. Rhea came into that team and they didn't miss a beat. So like it's nice to see him finally find success on this team, and I've been trying to sing his praises as much as I can.
Speaking of immaculate, by the way, that shirt Really good, Joe. Right into
in with the
matching
bed
with
sheets.
those
Yep.
bed sheets.
Get them in. Gotta get them in.
All right, very good. Kicked Volamel is in the chat. Thanks. So good.
You want to talk about these last 2 games and maybe wrap up? I don't want to take up too much of your time, Mineral. What's your?
I have plenty of time.
Okay, all right.
All right, 3-hour show. Let's go. Let's go. Come on. I mean,
Who's
we're
ready for the marathon?
They said they would never use the applause on this show. We're using it right now. 3-hour show. Just kidding.
Thoughts
Sorry, we're not
going
doing
into the old NYXL Gladiators. Do you want to do which? Okay, let me pose it this way. You're the guest. Which one would you like to talk about first? Do you want to talk about Dallas, Vancouver, or the more interesting matchup of NYXL Gladiators?
I don't think there's much to say about Vancouver, Dallas. Honestly.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah, this is the big one. So before we get Mineral's take, I need a reminder, because we did this on Mineral. We do a PvP segment where Joe and Yiska go head to head and like debate about a topic, and then we kind of choose a winner here. Mm-hmm. Yiska, who did you choose? You chose Gladiators, and Joe chose NYXL.
I chose the opposite team, yes.
So based on those predictions, just a reminder for those listening and watching of where these other hosts have their stakes in.
Yeah.
Okay, now give us your thoughts.
Honestly, I think this could be one of the closest matchups. I think it's pretty much a toss-up. Just because New York's looked like really trended down with the 2 losses against Atlanta. I think they made so many uncharacteristic mistakes, and again, you could have seen they're just not in sync. Like they pop a support ult and they're not pushing, or some of the people are pushing because they assume you're going to push and then they don't. Like there's been a lot of these hitches that really weird. Whereas I think Gladiators, obviously, like they didn't finish off the stage that well either with the loss to Boston. They looked very shaky, made a lot of uncharacteristic errors, but I still think overall they've looked a little bit better. Maybe I think like if I had to pick, I'd probably pick Gladiators in 5, like going 3-2. I just think like New York had this style where they would farm energy and they would try and pressure you with energy advantage, and it worked for a really long time. And then I think people kind of figure it out. And again, it kind of goes back to what I said. You have to be super versatile with how you approach. And it's very dangerous in 3-3 to get into habits. Like, this is how we're always going to approach these fights. We have a combo, they have a combo. This is how we're always going to fight it. Like, you have to be able to make reads on the fly. And I felt like that's why maybe like NYXL got a little stagnant. And when Atlanta really pressured them, they kind of faded a little bit. And I think Gladiators is the type of team that is very aggressive. They always try to make the first move. Like, they don't always execute perfectly, but they are very, very proactive. They do have a similar style to New York in some ways, but I think they're a little more aggressive with how they choose to use their ultimates. So yeah, I'd probably pick Gladiators.
Joe, any
rebuttal?
Rebuts?
It's tough because
you took that stance really seriously.
Oh yeah,
show.
very much so.
My God,
about the old Mary Man meta and Pine being on the roster. And
Pine is an all-star. Yeah, I get it. Yeah.
Much in the same way that I would have argued last stage, New York was my pick because I assumed they were the infallible machine team that they would analyze you and be able to figure out some sort of counter strategy, or they were so good at their one style that they could beat everybody else, right? It was so different. And I still want to see Vancouver NYXL. Maybe not. Actually, I take that back. Maybe I don't want to see that anymore because it seems like NYXL style has been completely figured out, at least from Atlanta, to say the least. Generally, I don't know. I don't know if this is enough time to get their stuff together to adapt to a new style. Maybe they've tweaked some things to support it a little bit better. They still have a bench to pull from. I don't know if that's going to get activated in this match, but it's difficult to really put any eggs in the New York basket because everything is trending downwards, like Mineral said.
I also, like, another thing that I think most people noticed as well and was mentioned is that Nene just seems off. He was absolutely incredible in stage 1, and it feels like after that missed grab against Seoul in the playoffs, everything is just falling apart. Because you look at the schedule that Nixel had this stage, everyone's like, well, this is an easy 7-0, right? And they end up going 5-2. They finish slow. Nane is looking a little off. I think statistically, when I looked at the stats a couple of weeks ago, they were trending downwards by a lot. Like, even though they were winning the games, his stats were going down. So maybe he wasn't playing as confident, not taking as many off angles. I haven't studied New York enough to be able to say with certainty, but I think that's probably been an issue as well.
So Yiska does this weird robot matrixy thing where he speaks in percentages. He's like, oh yeah, NYXL 40, 45. So give me a percentage here for you. Like if you were going to go to Wiston's lab tonight and you're like, you know what, I'm putting in my weights. You said LA Gladiators, but what do you put for that? 55, 45?
Maybe 58, 42.
All right.
57, 43, something like that.
That's going to be close, though.
Calculated.
Right?
I like it. Yeah. I like it very much.
Should be interesting.
99-1 NYXL. Let's go.
Oh, boy. That's a bench
I'm taking out the bench model right there. Yeah, no,
the old Chad Gamers prediction.
Yiska, where are you sitting on this one, man?
I think that's a good... Yeah, I'd probably just go 55 flats.
Oh, yeah, the lazy route. Got it. Great. Yes. Good. Yeah. So glad you're on the show. Be the lazy. Thing is,
no, just kidding. These are even harder to predict simply because it's not like you can look at the maps and then figure out what the percentages are. It's like loser's pick. So depending on how that goes, I think it's much harder to predict certainly than a regular season game.
It's true. At least with NYXL, right?
Yeah. I wonder if it does go the distance and it does go to game 5, does the pressure... See, it's so hard to even give New York the nod here and saying, oh, you have experience in these pressure situations, because every time they get there, they flake. And even when they don't get there, sometimes they just flake out. Against Atlanta, back in season 1, they still had matches that were oddly close for no reason. It felt like they were just, to bring up the old meme, they were just sandbagging, like they weren't taking it seriously. Everything that you want to say about New York is now in question. Is their style, they have this really cool style. Is it the best style? Do they have the experience on stage? Hard to say. I mean, technically they do, but does that necessarily mean anything for them? Gladiators have a great shot at beating this team and making an upset. Maybe this isn't even that much of an upset as much as we'd like it to be.
No, it isn't.
You asked if NYXL has great style, and I just have to say that, their merch.
Have you seen their shoes?
Their merch looks great, man. They've got Nike Airs for days.
Oh yeah.
They've got Nike Airs. They've got Freeze. They're good. NYXL has style.
But they do.
That's no doubt.
I've seen Joe Next tattoo. It's you could say a style.
So let's do some percentages here on Titans Fuel. Listen, I love the Dallas Fuel. For a lot of perspectives, they're just great, but I just can I go above? I don't even think I can go above 70-30 or below 70-30.
Yeah, that's saying a lot. I think I don't remember who exactly it was on Oversight. I think it was Monty who said it would be nice to see Dallas really come out with some Chengdu-esque comps to really throw them for a different loop, because there's no way you're going to beat them straight up. Just not happening. Sorry. All the Dallas fans out there, you're not going to beat one of the best. And I can't in good faith say they are the best right now. I still want to see the run back with San Francisco, Vancouver as the best 3-3 team in the world at the moment. I want to see Dallas come out. I want to see them run some weird DPS comps.
By the way, one of the advantages of having the new reseeding format in playoffs means that we should see San Francisco and
by
Vancouver.
All prediction.
Any thoughts,
methods?
by the way, Mineral? Are you a fan of the reseeding in playoffs? For that, so the highest seed faces the lowest seed, even in so you go quarter semis. or semi-quarters. Do you like the reseeding, even though it definitely favors the higher seeded teams?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's difficult to say. Obviously, you can get screwed over as a team that potentially gets an upset, like
Stage 1.
Seoul beats
NYXL.
New York Excels and NYXL, and they're like, oh, here's your reward, the Vancouver Titans, you know.
Yeah.
So, but I think it does have the highest chance of giving you the two best teams, I suppose, in the finals. That's assuming the two best teams are the highest seeds, because again, when you have only 7 games in a stage, what if, say, Vancouver played against New York and Gladiators and shock the stage, and they end up like 5-2 with the 4 seed, then you're, you know, then it's different, and everything is just so like all the seeding is so much dictated by the schedule most of the time, I think. But yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily mind it, but I can see how it can be annoying for lower seeded teams.
I mean, it's even more weird this stage, because even though Vancouver had a perfect stage, they are still only third seed. Based on the divisions, right? So that in itself is a little bit, yeah. I mean, but yes, I definitely agree that it just has the highest percentage of giving us great finals, which, by the way, happened last time. Mm-hmm. Also, for people that say, reseeding is so bad, like Seoul had to upset twice, I have a very easy solution for you. Just have Seoul win every stage match during the regular season. That's what it is.
Snaps, man. Snaps. Claps. You get, which one's claps? I don't even know. That one. There it is. So this is interesting. Brought it up from totally new name on Twitch. Says the top 2 seeds are always division leaders, so the reseeding doesn't really makes no sense. That's not a bad point when we talk about relative division power strength, right?
Yeah. Yes, but at the same time, the thing is,
at the same time, Newman, good point. New name, good point. But Yiska wants to argue right now, so go ahead, Yiska. Yeah.
But okay, so it probably will never make less sense than it does now, because the divisions are so different. Mm-hmm. And already, do you feel that's egregious at the moment? Not really. It's not terrible.
You're not seeing a completely random team have a second seed when they don't deserve to be as a second seed. Like, yeah, it's a little weird to see London as a second seed, but they're not that weird.
Yeah, I mean, Joe, weren't you the one, though, who said that Shock and Titans are in a league of their own and then everybody else? Was that you, Joe, on Tuesday?
Yeah, no, 100%.
So you don't think it's egregious with... Is egregious the right word? You don't think it's ridiculous or whatever that Titan Shock are S tier, and then London Gladiators, maybe NYXL, are A tier. You don't think it's weird that then, you know?
I don't think it's completely weird with how the league's been formatted to have Vancouver be a 3rd seed, for instance. Like, they're not like 5th seed. There's not like some crazy, like, the top 3 in your division get buys because, you know, we want to focus on divisional play. Having, you know, the first place team in your division, you know, it just sucks that one division is a little bit more stacked than the other. Like, it's not that crazy to me. I don't know.
No, I'm not a big fan of that, because if you think about it, so London is the 3rd seed, but they get the 2nd seed because they win their division. But imagine, so week 2, they won 2-1 against Philly. Imagine if that's a 2-1 loss. Then we see a London that is 5-2 and would be ranked below Gladiators. So you would have Shock, Titans, Gladiators, Spitfire would be 4th, and they would be awarded the 2nd seed. Like, to me, that's when it gets crazy, and it's not you know, one map difference, and you have that scenario here. So I think, yeah, I don't know, I'm not too big of a fan of the division leader getting the 2nd seed.
Dream says the seeds are so random that reseeding or standard bracket doesn't matter.
I think, and again, maybe he can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he's referencing how and where you're playing your matches. if that makes sense. Like one stage, your schedule could be really weak, and then your seeding's really good. And then another schedule, your schedule's really, really hard, and your seeding is really poor. That doesn't really necessarily explain your strength as accurate as it could. Maybe he can.
But the thing is, the problem isn't the reseeding. The problem is the schedule. Then that doesn't mean you need to get rid of reseeding. That means you got to get rid of the scheduling issue.
The problem is the division allocations, isn't it?
Also, it's part of the problem.
It's part of it.
All I need is all three smart brains to say, John, I agree with you. I'm just kidding. Don't worry. I will never make you do that on this podcast. Chat, by the way, we're going to keep kind of going on this conversation, but if you have questions for Mineral, make sure to post them in chat now. Because we are wrapping up. Mineral's like, yeah, I can go longer, and I joked about a 3-hour show. I'm not making it a 3-hour show. No. So, so make sure to ask those questions now, kind of as we start to wrap up. Otherwise, your question will not get answered, and your opinion rendered irrelevant.
A fan hasn't asked this question, but I want to know from another team's perspective. Recently, we had somebody who I will not name go on a very long tirade about how they thought the Overwatch League broadcast was a little bit too harsh on players and how that could affect their careers. We'll say. Where do you fall on that fence? Do you think the broadcast has been a little bit too hard on people? Do you think they could go harder? Is it actually affecting their careers? As somebody kind of who's experienced the inside of the league, what's your kind of take?
I also wish I had a baby crying thing, but sounder. But besides that,
I think that's a very, very interesting question, and I have a lot of experience with that. Maybe not in terms of like the broadcast talking about it, but obviously being on a team that underperformed and catching a lot of heat. So obviously, I know how much it can affect people. I've also seen a lot of players be affected by what other people write about them, on Reddit and things like that. Like obviously that affects you. And I think it's mostly because most of the guys who come into the league, they haven't experienced, they have never been on the podium in terms of having the spotlight, having people care about what you say, what you do, how you perform, right? So they're not exposed to the highs and they're not exposed to the lows. So when you get flamed, when you get pressured from fans and criticized, it's very easy to it's very difficult to distance yourself from that until you kind of become a veteran and you're like, well, okay, I've heard this all before and now I can laugh about it. But I think for anyone who comes in and is fresh and hasn't dealt with that, I think it can certainly be very, very hard. It was difficult for me in season 1 until I learned to sort of ignore it, not stay off social media when I know I have to, because really, even if you feel like it doesn't affect you, maybe it affects you like 2 or 3%, maybe it distracts you a little bit. And then all of a sudden you're doing a disservice to your team because you're letting someone from the outside and their opinion affect you, right? But that's in terms of dealing with community criticism. When we're talking about the broadcast, I think the broadcast carries a ton of power in terms of that they can dictate the narrative. If they make a meme, everyone's gonna follow suit, right?
Sure.
And I don't mind when they criticize players. I think everyone should be able to get criticized. I think that's why people are engaged. That's why it's fun. If you're playing bad, you should get flamed. If you play well, you should get praised. If you do poorly, you should, it's just how it works. Like emotions are involved in this game, right? But I think when it comes to the broadcast, I don't think they should always be nice and never criticize. But I also feel like they really need to have, if they have a strong negative opinion about someone, they really have to get the facts right. They have to show, why is this true? I'm really upset about this player playing like this because here are the facts. Look at his positioning here. He's in his positions here and here and here. Here are the statistics that back it up, and not statistics that don't make sense, but here's the context for these statistics, right? And if you're making a strong statement like, you better back it up with facts and film and all of that stuff. Then I don't really mind it. But I feel like sometimes, because you have to be entertaining, there has to be some comedic element to the desk. Sometimes someone might say something about a player and it's really not true. You know, like the super bad stuff. I thought that was when I saw that, we were actually warming up for one of our games. When I saw it, I was like, ooh, that's in really bad taste. And like, you know, and now Super shows like, well, he's actually the best Reinhardt in the league. So now the desk looks kind of silly. And in that situation, like it could have affected him. Not as much him. Like I think he's sort of a veteran now. I think he can block it out. I don't think he cares about it, but obviously the perception from the public can really get affected by the broadcast. So I think you really got to get your facts straight in that regard.
We got a really good question here. We don't normally get good questions in chat for Twitch, but this was an important one. Apply, who's a verified streamer on Twitch, partner, says, who is your favorite player and why is it me?
Well, I got to go with Apply just because he's, you know, at such a young age, it's just incredible to have that kind of a hero pool and be, you know, like play that well. And I also saw, I believe, did he post, because I woke up today and everyone was posting these Twitter photos when like it changes your gender, right?
Face,
I am not a attractive female, by the way. Like all these other guys are like, look how attractive I am as a female. I'm like, wow, look how I'm your just really annoying aunt. So sorry, Yiska.
So I was gonna commend Apply for that. Maybe he looks good as a female as well, but I'm actually not sure if he posted one of himself. So maybe it would be irrelevant. But yeah, those are the reasonings.
What have you seen privately?
It's a whole different mayhem I don't want to know about. Yeah. What else do we have here? Reprise actually asked 2 questions. Who's the best coach not in Owl Kappa? And then he also said, what is the most important quality to have as a player and as a coach from your perspective?
A good question. I think
besides a really good microphone, by the way, I am actually taking tryouts. I won't play well. I don't actually know more than I'm a pretty good Zarya. But, you know, besides that, I'm just going to sound really good in your scrims.
Yeah. So I think it's hard to narrow it down to one quality. I think work ethic is super important. I think you can see a lot of players who maybe they're good. They come up and then they get comfortable and they stop working as hard and then they fall off. I think work ethic is also important in the sense that if you're a player who's maybe not that strong in this meta and has to be benched, can you put your ego aside and, you know, work your way through and grind and accept that role without being sort of toxic in your team environment, actually contribute to the team environment. And I think that like coachability and work ethic sort of go hand in hand. And I think those are the 2 most important things that can help, you know, a player grow. In terms of a coach, I think open-mindedness is a big one. I think it's when you go into an environment and you start coaching guys, you have to know how to. Obviously, you have to have a lot of knowledge. You have to have competence so that players respect you. Because if they see that you don't know what you're talking about and you can't back up your arguments with facts or experience, they're not really going to listen to you. So the ability to gain that respect is super important. But also, I think open-mindedness in terms of you don't have the answers to everything. You know, if your Winston player has probably played a lot more Winston than you have, so. Can you how are you starting a conversation when you're giving him criticism? Are you saying, what were you seeing here? How are you thinking? Instead of just saying, this is wrong, and approaching something in a narrow mindset, I think it's super important to be open-minded. And if someone goes, no, I think actually that's not true, and they come up with a good excuse for it, then it makes sense, right? But if you're a coach that is very stuck in his ways and goes in and like, you did this wrong, then immediately the response back from the player is going to be aggressive as well if he disagrees with you, right? So understanding how to keep these discussions productive and the coaching productive, I think, comes from the coach having an open mind, I think.
Love it. Sweet_10 asks, do you think moving to a 1 game per week and using a format similar to that of the NFL, teams return home for majority of the week and travel Saturday, Sunday, would be better logistically for the league. But I think more than anything, 1 game per week, number one. Like, I would love to hear your thoughts on that in the current iteration. But also, if it was 1 game per week, but you have whatever travel back and forth, like actual home and away games.
Yeah, I think we kind of exhausted this topic, and I think we reached the conclusion that we don't really have an answer because it's so tough in terms of how to schedule it optimally. Like, I really don't know what the best format would be, especially next year. Like, I'm completely clueless about how they're going to make that work. This season, I think, yeah, I mean, it would help if there was only 1 game per week. It would be easier for teams to prepare. You probably get a little better, performances from all the teams.
Of game.
Yeah, and I mean, I haven't checked the stage 2 stats, but I made a video about the stats in stage 1 where you could see teams who play 2 games per week, and when their opponent only plays 1 game per week, the team that has fewer opponents to prepare for actually performed. I think the win percentage for those teams, for the teams that had a tougher schedule, was like 11-17 or something like that. So I do think, to make it fair, you could probably make it just 1 game per week, and it would be a little easier for everyone. You get higher quality games and more balanced results.
Last question, I promise. And it was, what would you like to see in a hero? Let's just use a hero design, or if you think a map design would be more functional, but I have a feeling it'd be hero design. What would you like to see more in a hero design in the future? Maybe to help the current competitive scene in being, I don't know, like just more. I don't know if I don't want to say
more
watchable
dynamic
of an esport, but like, yeah, more dynamic of an esport. Something that would maybe hold some certain, just whatever abilities or play styles in check. That's a good one.
So I think
from Lilacs.
I think that's a good question, but rather than saying like this type of hero would solve a lot of things or this type of mouse solve a lot of things, I think I kind of agree with what a lot of people have been talking about lately, which was a topical thing where everyone's saying, let just lock 2-2-2. I think like I'm on that boat as well. And I think that would be the biggest change that you could make, and one that would make it easier for Blizzard to balance the game, because now when it's 3-3, like everyone's trying to beat it, but it's just so hard to balance the game. Like you can shift the 3-3 around to still play at a higher tempo, have so much sustain that it's impossible to really play anything else if you optimize the 3 support compositions. So I think just liking 2-2-2 would probably solve a lot of issues, and yeah, make for more interesting gameplay. It would be easier to nerf certain metas and bring new metas into fold instead of being stuck in this 3-3 meta that we have for a long time.
But my diversity. Okay, sorry. We're going to go ahead and get out of here. Chat, thank you guys so much. Awesome questions. You guys have been great in the chat. Joe, Yiska, C+. Good job.
Nice.
Good job this week.
Passing.
That's a passing grade, yes.
Yeah, I think in the U.S. it means that you can get into Yale or USC if you pay enough money. But
talking like someone with rich parents.
I know, yeah. But for real, obviously the big thank you has to go to Mineral. Mineral, I'm going to let you go first. First of all, thank you so much for being on the show. So much incredible insight. I can't wait to be able to post this show. Before we get out of here, though, where can people find you? What do you have coming up? Like, what can people expect from you on Twitter at Mineral_OW or anywhere else? What's next for you, man?
What's next for me? That's a good question. I think, obviously I finished off the season in Mayhem. We didn't really do that well. But hopefully I do want to get back in the league eventually. For now, I have been just creating content, making videos. It's something that I'm interested in as well, because obviously I have a background in journalism. So
awesome.
While I have a little bit of downtime, I'm enjoying kind of trying out a new craft, learning new things, as I do have a lot of knowledge, obviously, but I have to really work on the delivery, on the knowledge. And that's why I enjoy learning something new and studying you guys, because you guys have been doing this for a while, right? So just kind of getting obsessed by a different craft has been very interesting to me while I try to figure things out. Obviously, I do want to get back into Overwatch League. I have some offers both from Overwatch League teams, coaching offers from Overwatch League teams and from academy teams. But honestly, I'm really no rush. The most important thing for me is that if I do go back to Overwatch League, and when I do go back to Overwatch League, I want to make sure that I'm in a situation that is where I can be successful, where I believe in the infrastructure, where I believe in the coaching staff, and I can learn from the coaching staff, where I believe in the roster, and I think we can win. Because ultimately, I got into gaming because I'm a competitor and I want to win. And obviously, I haven't really been able to achieve that yet. So, if I do go back to the Overwatch League and coach, all of those things have to kind of fall into place. And obviously now, like most of the good teams they did their homework. They did a good job during the offseason.
Yeah.
They're fully staffed, right?
I was gonna say, which team you put a draft hat on in the NFL, you get to pick. I'm not gonna actually make you answer that question, but
but
I want to see the hat.
Yeah. Like since my departure happened, since I left the Mayhem mid-season, I obviously understood that I might not get my dream job immediately and find a team that I want to work for, because the good teams aren't really looking for staff, and I understood that I might have to sit the season out if I don't get a team that kind of ticks all my boxes. So we'll see what happens. I'm in a rush to take an offer right now. I'm enjoying creating content, so you can check out my videos. I try to be educational with all that stuff and try and help out and coach.
Do you have a custom URL? So are they on your custom? So your videos, are you doing on them on Twitch, on YouTube?
I upload YouTube videos as well. Mostly, I do some streams on Twitch. I did a coaching session just before this on Twitch, but usually it's YouTube. So it's youtube.com is like -u-mineral OW. So yeah, that's where I usually upload.
Awesome.
When I have something going.
I really enjoyed the like thorough analysis of the bunker comp situation, how that developed. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But just one short question. If you get a job, does it have to be a head coach position?
No, absolutely not. I think one of the big things, obviously, because we were understaffed for a long period of time, and even this season, I didn't really get to work with a coaching staff too much. Obviously, we had coaches coming in and out. Even when we signed coaches, there were a lot of visa issues. So I didn't really get to work with a full coaching staff. And it's one of the things that I really missed, I guess, during my coaching time, is that I wish I had more people to bounce ideas off and learn from, instead of trying to like solve everything myself. So I'm certainly not opposed to being an assistant coach, especially if I believe in the infrastructure of the roster, and I feel like I can learn from the head coach, I can learn from the other assistant coaches, and be in an environment where I can grow. Because I understand that even though I could make a lot of excuses as to why the time in Florida didn't work out, I tend to look at things in terms of what can I do better, where can I grow, even if it only changes 5% of the outcome. I'm committed to making that change and getting better, so we can get that 5% edge, because sometimes that's all you need to get some momentum, right?
Yeah.
And that's how I look back at things, and I think I could definitely learn a lot from other teams, outside perspectives and things like that. So I'm definitely very open to that.
Awesome. Love it. Great question, Yiska. Make sure to follow your hosts at Volamel, at Yiska Out, and at KickedTripod. And of course, you can just search on YouTube for all those other different things. We're going to get out of here, though. This was a special episode of Tactical Crouch. We went a little long because, you know what? Why not? Why the not? Like just because we feel like it. We're going to be back on Tuesday with another episode of Tactical Crouch. Follow the show everywhere, Tactical_Crouch. And, just search for Tactical Crouch. Make sure to like, subscribe, follow, whatever you need to do to make sure that when a new Tactical Crouch show goes live. And of course, if you really, really, really like the show, subscribe to the channel, twitch.tv/KickedTripod, or, donate bits. Just straight up cash is fine. Joe's not picky, man. Whatever gets him.
Take what I can get, man.
His plaid sheets, man. That's all he cares about. We're going to be back on Tuesday. Thanks so much for hanging out. We might be back after the music. I'll let you know. Talk to you guys later. Bye.